Everybody, my name is Ruth Dennis and I'm Principal Educational Psychologist for Bradford, and I'm going to be leading your session today. Okay, so let's get started. So this is the manager's version of the training materials for supporting staff wellbeing during COVID-19. And the purpose of the session is to provide some reassurance to school leadership teams in relation to staff wellbeing. From talking to school leaders, I know that many of you have already started to take great strides into supporting staff wellbeing. This has included all sorts of really creative, innovative ideas, which is marvellous. And so the first part of the session is going to be to carry out a stock take of emotional wellbeing strategies that you're already using, just to make sure that there's nothing that's slipped off your radar or that maybe you used to do and don't still do. And then the second part of the session is to provide a framework for enhanced work on wellbeing to support staff, particularly due to the stresses and strains that COVID-19 has caused. And so on the basis of that, on the back of that, we'll look at the development of a whole school PERMA action plan. So just as a real basic opening slide, I just wanted to reflect on why does staff wellbeing matter? And I think you, as leaders, you'll know that how teachers feel on a daily basis is really likely to affect their performance in the classroom, and then that in turn affects their performance and the performance of the children. So the happier your teachers are, the more happy and more motivated the children will be as well. And I think having a good sense of well-being also helps your staff to be able to concentrate and better respond to the challenges that come along. So if you've got somebody in your class with additional needs or with some behavioural issues, if you're feeling better about yourself, you're in a better place to be able to meet those needs. And I think the research shows that if you can manage to achieve that level of staff wellbeing within your school, that your sickness absence record will be better and you'll have greater staff retention. So we know that it's really important. And I think this graphic is really useful because it probably saves me having to say lots and lots of things. The premise that if we want to support others, we need to make sure that we're looking after ourselves first is really, really important. If you don't look after the well-being of your teachers, then they're not going to be able to look after the well-being of the children and young people. And I think it's important to also say that this is also true of school leaders. Most of the school leaders I speak to are good at looking after their staff's well-being, but they sometimes neglect their own well-being. You need to look after yourselves in order to support your staff. So as a team, as you're working through this, think about what you can do as a management team to support each other, to help each other through this time. So just again, some really basic introductory slides here. We know that traditionally our stress response was to provide that fight or flight impulse so that we could stay safe in the face of quite severe dangers. And whilst we don't often have those very severe dangers anymore, we do still have those responses that come in the form of the hormones released and the effect that has on our bodies. And so we all know that we will have those responses, but there are positive stresses and negative stresses. So the positive stresses can be quite productive. So having a deadline, having a timescale to work on things is really important. But if that is continuous without a break and never ending, that's when it starts to impact upon people and move into negative stress. So those increased cortisol levels over time affect our ability to function, and they affect our well-being in general. So it's really important to think about how do we do what we can to support well-being and contain the stresses that we feel. And this graphic here is quite useful just to think about. We need to make sure that we're supporting people to be in that optional functioning optimal functioning part of the arc there. So not at one end where people shut down and withdraw, and not at the other side where they've got heightened anxiety and heightened behavioural symptoms, but they're functioning in a optimal way. And using Maslow's hierarchy of needs is quite a useful way of conceptualizing this. I'm not going to spend much time talking about this because you'll all have seen it before and know it in and out. But just to reflect on, Maslow talked about physiological safety, love and belonging, and esteem needs, and the need for all of those to be fulfilled in order for us to function well within our environment. So we know that in order to function well, we need to have some element of each of those. At the same time, we know that COVID-19 has really impacted on our well-being as individuals and as groups of individuals. And so working through Maslow's hierarchy of need there's a number of physiological needs which have really been impacted upon by COVID. So, for example, if we think back to March last year, there was some real concerns about food availability, about being able to get things from the supermarket, being able to go to the supermarket. If you think about those long queues waiting outside supermarkets, people were really worried about being able to provide food for their families. We were limited on our physical activity. We weren't allowed to go out beyond a certain distance, and just the stress of being in a pandemic situation caused a lot of disturbed sleep. So all of these things really impacted upon the physiological well-being of everybody, I think. And within school, I know from talking to teachers and head teachers, there was very little respite from February onwards, really, because there's so many new regulations, new changes, new skills to learn, new ways of working, that people really didn't have time to rest. And particularly as managers, people felt that they had to keep going, keep being positive at all times in order to keep everybody together. And so those physiological needs took a real hit through COVID-19. Those safety needs have also taken a hit. They've taken a hit because of the very real threat of catching COVID. COVID is a really serious illness, and the fear of catching that is really impacts on people's feelings of safety. And trying to support your family and protect your family has also been a real key concern for people and has impacted on people's feeling of safety. And if we think about how this impacts in school, there's lots of the changes that you've had to make have had a real impact on people's feeling of safety. Whilst you've done things to make them be safe physically, the loss of their known structures, the way they always work. So, for example, the timetable has changed, the groups of adults that they've worked with has changed, the groups of children that they've worked with has changed. That change to the structure really impacts on people's feelings of safety and security. So you can see why that has contributed to people's feeling of unease and their reduction in their well-being. And clearly, love and belonging has also been impacted upon by COVID. So people have been ill, they've had ill family members, and they may have had people that have died through COVID. And so all of this has really impacted on love and belonging needs. And not only has the virus impacted on them in that way, the measures that we've had to take in order to reduce our transmission of the disease have also really impacted on love and belonging needs. So we haven't been able to meet together, we haven't been able to meet our families in face-to-face, we haven't been able to go out with people, go for a coffee, go to the pub or anything like that. So that loss of social contact is a real key element of why people are feeling stressed by COVID and the ongoing stresses of that. And again, that doesn't only impact on people at home, it also impacts on them at school as well. So you may have had members of staff who have been ill with COVID, you may have lost colleagues or people from your school community. And also just that general feeling of collegiate support, being able to sit with people over lunchtime, being able to catch 5 minutes with them, working in a safe way has reduced and changed the support that you get from your colleagues. And so, again, love and belonging needs have been impacted upon by COVID-19. So, from what I can see and what people tell me, schools have already started to work through this. They've done some great work thinking about how they can support staff wellbeing. And looking through what people have talked to me about and looking through the research into this, they've used that universal, targeted and specialist model to put together whole school packages. And so what we're going to talk about here is just some really brief information about them, because I think what you need to do is just look through this material as a leadership group and decide which bits you've already got covered and which bits you need to do some work on. And it may be that you're starting at the very beginning. It may be that you've got all of this in place and you don't need to do any more, or just keep things under review. So thinking about those different areas, the universal support is your overall staff wellbeing ethos and policy. It's about having staff wellbeing on your agenda and as being something that you consciously think about and work on as a staff team. So it might be about thinking about the spaces that your staff have, the staff rooms, thinking about how staff are able to express their concerns to you, thinking about who champions wellbeing within school, how do they communicate with people in school, how do they keep wellbeing on the agenda. All of those things are really important. So in a minute, I'm going to give you a chance to think through and look through this. And there's a Word document alongside of this just to help you go through and look at what you already do and whether there are things that are missing. The targeted support is about how you, rather than the ethos and the underpinnings, it's more about some specifics about what extra do you do to really focus on emotional wellbeing. And it might be how you provide support and supervision to your staff. It might be about some of the training that you provide to them, and it might be about how you do wellbeing check-ins with your staff or wellbeing events. So think about that in a minute, about what targeted support do you put in place to make sure that you're really capturing and supporting the wellbeing of your staff. And then that specialist support at the very top of that pyramid is about what happens when you identify that somebody within school is struggling with their wellbeing and really needs some additional help. What do you do? What framework do you use? And how do you make sure that they get the support that they require? So that might be through employee assistance program. It might be through some counselling or referral to occupational health or whatever. So there are different things, and it will depend on what you've chosen to do as a school. But do you know what that route is, and do you know what you would do if you have somebody whose well-being is of a serious concern? So on this slide here, I've just gone back again to that idea of Maslow and thinking about how we can use Maslow to reflect on what we're doing to support staff wellbeing, particularly during COVID. And so this is an alternative if you don't want to use the universal targeted and the top one, I've forgotten what it's called. You could use the Maslow to think about it as well. So thinking about physiological needs, what are you doing or what could you do in school to help support the physiological needs of staff? What about the safety needs? What about belonging and esteem? And so I've put in a few suggestions there, and these are all things that people have talked to me about and told me that they're already doing. So look at these. Are there other things that you're doing that you would like to add to this to make sure that you're covering all of those areas? So I'm going to ask you to pause the video now and spend some time discussing with your management team what wellbeing measures you already have in place. Are there any aspects that you haven't yet thought about? Is there anything that you need to work on? And what do you need to do to progress this? There's some information on the next 3 slides which you can have a look at to support this conversation and just to think through, are we doing everything that we can do? And you might want to then draft that into a plan of how you want to support your staff wellbeing. Okay, so pause the video now